Hello everybody, my name is Christian Quick, and welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be talking about textures, and then textures. If you think textures is a small topic, you're wrong, because it is the make or break of not only your individual decorative style of making stuff, it is also the part in which you can tell if something is wrong with your block states, your models, and, well, your textures. I pointed to icon because technically that's a texture, but the first thing that we're going to need to do is we're going to have to make a texture file. We're going to have to model it because this block goes into a block file. So let's put our thing in HMH, so whatever your mod is called in your assets, and let's make a directory called textures. It has to be called textures because that is the name. So don't. It's not because of the purple. It's just because that's just what it's called in Minecraft code. So please call it textures. And then we're going to put in new directory, and then this one we're going to call block. Now this one can change based on whatever is in here, because right here it's telling you to go into that block folder. So if I said blocks, then this has to be blocks. If this is a block, then this has to be block. Okay, so then we now looking for a PNG file. I think there's a couple other things that it might look for, but PNG is a nice default. So let us make a PNG file. Now I would recommend using a GIMP. You could do GIMP, it's up to you. I use GIMP because you know, outside of like paint, everyone's got paint. But if I make a texture, let's make a new 16 by 16, and then if I scroll in all the way, oh yeah, you could not zoom in at 25,600% on paint. I think your default is like 800. That, right? Could you imagine doing a 16 by 16 beautiful texture with this size? I mean, you can, but it'd be ridiculous. So I like to zoom in 9,000%. You know, you want to be extreme. This is extreme. 9,000%. That's usually what would work with my textures. Now, most textures are like how it's written, 16 by 16 pixels. This works for items and blocks, but right now we're going to be talking about blocks and, well, general textures. We'll get to items when we get to items. So right now we have a block. I didn't mean to make a new one. So let us make a new texture. So let's take this right here, this black, and actually let's make this, yeah, we'll do this. Boop. Awesome. And then let's just file, export as, and then we're going to call this, let's say, block.png, and you're going to want to save it somewhere where you can grab it. The reason I just made this a really extra texture is because there's some more cool stuff that I'm going to be getting to about these textures, so it's going to get a little bit tedious in a sense, because I'm going to be teaching you a lot about textures. So now let's put in our block in here, copy, OK, and now our block texture is made. So if we made this block correctly, this cube all and the block states and everything, this should no longer be a black and purple checkerboard. This should just be a completely black block, all filled in, no spaces, no holes, no nothing, just complete black. Alright, here we are, and what we notice is that the item is messed up, and we're like, oh no, our item is messed up. Well, let's place it down on the ground, and here we do, or here we are. We have this all completely black texture. Let's do one more. I want to cover my screen up. The little F1, gone, and back. So right here we got some of that miso black paint, and as nice as it is, there does seem to be a problem. We don't have an item model, and well, that's because we didn't claim for one. But it doesn't know to make an item model when we have this little textures thing. So how do we make it pull up an item? So we're going to make a new directory, and we're just going to call it item. Now, the model for blocks have, they come from a block state, points down to the model, but items do not have block states, so they get to skip this step and go straight to the model. Now, if I make a new file, and I call it block.json, and I hit enter, now that it's in a different file, we can now take a look at a reference. So let's see how Minecraft did it in our wondrous file of everything. So we have Minecraft. We're going to go into our models and item, and then we can look up what a diamond block. There we go. And it says that the parent the parent, so the file it's coming from is the block, is the folder coming from block. So although it skipped a block state, it's not necessarily skipping everything. So the block state makes this block, but this item is coming from here. And if there is no block it's coming from, then you're going to have to call it. Now, if we also remember that parent comes from certain files, this is where things are get also a little interesting, but we'll get to item stuff when we get there in a second as well. But first, or just first and foremost, just to make it easy for now, we're just going to kind of skip the item stuff, and we're just going to stick with the block until we finish all the stuff that I'm talking about about the block. So obviously, this is no longer Minecraft. It's going to be your mod name, and then obviously here we're just going to call it block, and then it should, if we restart this, should now point ourselves to item. And here we are. If we look at our inventory, it says the block.html3.block. It is now working as an item. We throw it on the ground, we pick it up, we place it, we break it. It is perfectly fine. You'll notice that there are breaking particles. If I try and break it consistently, it will generally always have that default particle of whatever the block is. There's a couple things where, like, sometimes you'll notice that they're black and that black and purple texture. The broken or missing texture is a good term for it. But this thing can go above and beyond. So we know that all textures are 16 by 16, but you can actually make this a larger texture. So let's add some red to this, because I think red and black look good together. And let's try and make this a 20 by 20 and see how it looks. So we go into our GIMP. We're going to increase the file, and then we're just going to say 20 by 20. There's a reason I'm checking these numbers. It's generally suggested you use things that are dividable by 4, so like 32 by 32, 64, 64, but just for the sake of my sanity, I'm just going to make it 20 by 20. We're going to make a brand new texture. We're going to fill it all the way in black, and then we're going to be switching over with this, and I'm going to start drawing with a red pen, and we're going to do this just to make sure that we can count all the way down to 20. A very simple step, but let's file and export as, and we're going to call this, you probably guessed it. Oop. Hold on, cancel, B-L-O-C-K, export, and then I can replace the file, export, but I still have to, unfortunately, personally drag it into here. So we have this block texture, it didn't update this, so we need to do is go into our pictures, it now has that red line. Let's move it over here, refactor, overwrite, and now it's got this. So let's now restart our Minecraft and see if it's got the 20 on there without affecting the world. We'll see what that means later. So now, in our inventory, even though we just changed the one texture, it does now have multiple sides, and we can see how things are facing each other. It kind of looks like an arrow block, to be honest. Very interesting. But it is non-rotatable. We can talk about rotations in a moment later, but as of now, I think it's interesting. I didn't mean to, but it's a seamless texture. Oops. Didn't mean for that, but it is what it is. And you can tell how, like, the trees are nice and everything looks good. The water's okay. Let's try and change this texture to something that's not dividable by 2. Because everything in Minecraft is square, but what happens if I make this an odd number texture? So if I go into GIMP one more time, let's make this a new texture, and we're going to change this to 19 by 19. So this still is square, and then we're going to use some different colors. Let's use let's make this black. Let's put it on the blue side, but make it like a nice, like a dark blue so that you can still kind of tell. We're going to color this in, and you can easily tell it is 19 by 19. And then once again, we're going to use this red pen, and we're just going to go all the way across so that if we wanted to count, it's up to you if you want to count it, but I guarantee it's the number. So we're going to file, export into our pictures. We're going to call this block, export, and then we're just going to drag it into here before we restart it. So here is our new block texture, refactor, overwrite, and then run the tutorial. All right, so here we have our block. It is nice, it is functioning, and up close it looks pretty darn good. But I should have looked at the trees, and you might not notice a quality difference, but if you look at the trees in the very far background, you're going to say, whoa, those look hazy. Those look like they're just straight up tripping, and I don't know what the problem is. Same thing goes for the water. If I fly around, or if I look at the water and I just kind of look around, you notice it's hazy. If you try this in your own game just to see what I'm talking about, if you can't tell on the video that I'm making, you try it yourself and dare just take a look. I don't know if you can see this, but it's pretty bad. So Minecraft has these things called like bitmap levels, and they cannot handle anything that's indivisible by 2. And the bitmap levels it takes every texture and somehow divides it in some sort of way. So if your thing is somehow an odd number texture literally anywhere, it's just not gonna handle it, and it's pretty bad. So there lies that. So please, if you make any texture, you can make any texture, generally any size, but it has to be an even number. So then, let's ask ourselves the question, a ridiculous question, of what happens if I try and make a block the size in which it cannot handle. And by that I mean a rectangle. So let's try and add a texture, and let's make a new texture, and let's say we're going to put this as 16. That works, and then we're going to do 20. So let's go 1, 2, and then we're going to go 1 all the way across. And if my math is right, which it's probably not, oh no, 1, 2, and 1, 2. So this makes a perfect line in here. So we know that the ends have 2 textures. I wonder if it. Let's take a peek. I wonder if it's gonna either just clip out part of it. I think it's gonna clip it and try and force it to be a number, unless it's actually like squishing it, which I don't think Minecraft can do that. But I would be very surprised. If that is the case, then we both learned a lesson here at the same time. And the best way I'm going to do that is if it squishes it and I still see some red at the top and the bottom, then I'm just going to put a block next to it and then see if I can, if you will notice by the edges that if it was squished or not. And if it's clipped, then either both sides will be, will be clipped to 16 by 16, or it will just like go from here top to bottom and then do those. It is good to see that the game has features that, like, even if the game is broken, it won't crash it. So it seems, oh, I can still see all the textures, and it looks like they're squished, because see how those are rectangles? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. Let's compare edges together. And, yep, they are definitely squished. I definitely don't think it used to do this. I think it used to crash, but it seems that now it can handle it. But despite them still being even numbers, it does not affect the gradients of the world. So the world will still look fine and beautiful despite you making uneven rectangles are okay. Odd numbers are not okay. So that is something we learned. If you want to make all the odd numbers in the world, go for it. Or if you want to make all the odd numbers in the world, don't go for it. But if you want to make a bunch of rectangles in a square game, go for it. Just a bigger square. So I guess you can say that we both learned something together. I think in previous versions it used to crash, and I was trying to show that. But hey, updates in the game that make the game not crash and actually have you learn something is pretty good experience to have as well. So now that we have everything generally working out, let's go back to our 16 by 16 texture, and let's make just a simple. We're going to make a little X on it, and then we're going to cross it with the red one as well. Let's use this magenta here, and there is a perfect reason why I want to use this. And then let's use black, and let's go. We're going to do this, where we're going to make part of the texture invisible or have some invisibility. And I think in the game this is going to process as black or gray. It's going to do one of those two things. It might be, I think it's going to be black. So let's export this texture. Export. And then let's go into our block. And then we're going to throw this in here, refactor, overwrite. So now we have this texture. And it's gray right now because although it's invisible, it's because it's taking this gray. So it's either going to be like the gray I'm talking about is a light gray. Not that many people have actually seen the gray color. It's when you have an invisible texture, but it can't recognize that it's invisible, so it goes gray, compared to an object is supposed to be translucent and is not, so then it's black. And I think that is what we have right here, because right now I haven't told it to be invisible. I'm just saying that there's missing pixels, so it should be black. And sometimes it deletes all the blocks. I'm not too sure why, but let's go and make ourselves slash give at s, and then we'll do the HMH3 bool. Oh, I forgot to hit tab. There we go. And now we have this block we place on the ground, and just like I said, it is a black. Funny enough, items don't need that overlay, but blocks do. So you can see that even if I throw it on the ground, this item entity is completely see-through, while the block is not. So that is an interesting thing to know and realize. Now, I will be talking about how to make a special class file for transparent textures. That is what we're going to be talking about in the next video, is going to be transparent textures. But that is basically all you need to know to make a texture. But let's now go over, specifically for you guys, I want to go over what happens if troubleshooting, basically. What happens if I go and we're going to say what happens if there is a mistake with my block state, if there is a mistake with my block model, item model, and even my texture. What is going to happen? Let's start with a block state, and let's say that I said blocks. So obviously there isn't a thing called blocks in here, so let's restart it and see what it looks like. So what we do know is that if blocks is pointing to the model, then everything else should be in black and with that missing texture, because it can't point to blocks because there's no file, there's no model that we made called blocks. So the whole thing should be broken. However, funny enough, our item model still seems to be working. So if you know that your block is broken, but your item texture is working, then you know that there is a problem in the block state. Also keep track of the coloring of the block, and notice how it's lighter in this one. There are some problems in which they are lighter and darker depending on the issue. And so just you'll notice when you get your experience on the lighting textures, but let's continue. So obviously this is supposed to be called block. But what if our mock model is called blocks? Oop. It's okay. And our item model is still called the same. So then we just kind of move on with the texture. So here we are now. The model is the shape. And so now in both lighter textures, the block state seems to be messed up, but it's not the block state's fault that it is this way. It is because everything past the texture is fine. Now, unfortunately, both of them are going to be light, so you're going to have to remember that the difference is the shape and the model. Notice how that when I threw the block on the ground, before it was the correct shape, but now it doesn't know what the shape is supposed to look like. When you throw the item on the ground, it's going to, even if the block state is correct, if the model is wrong, it's not going to understand what shape it's supposed to be, so it's going to be absolutely massive, just to really let you know that there is a problem in the model. So now we know what happens when there's a problem in just the model. Let's go into the item model, and let's call this one blocks. So then we're going to hit restart, and then go back into the world. And here we are. Notice how the item is darker, while the item that gets thrown is lighter. You'll also notice that it's reversed from the block state being wrong while everything else is correct, in which the block is correct, but the item is large, and although the shape is also correct, it just doesn't understand because the item grabs the block form, but if there is nothing wrong with the original shape, it's going to keep the shape based on what this is saying, but then the item model is wrong. So the model, remember, the model is the shape. So it's also going to still have the same problem where it's massive, but the difference here is your block will be correct and your item is wrong. So then let's go over the last thing. What happens if the texture is wrong? This also occurs if the texture is missing or just doesn't have a texture. And I think this one is also going to be pretty obvious. We're going to refactor this to blocks and then restart. And obviously, just like as if everything was wrong, including the block state, the difference between the block state being wrong, because it follows everything after, is that the item model should be still working correctly. But if the texture name is wrong, then absolutely nothing should be working, because everything from the bottom points at the texture. So placing it on the ground, the item model is now correct, where it is the correct size. It is not massive, so that is a very good indication that there's not something wrong with the model of the item, but the item itself is looking perfectly fine. So now we will pick this up, and from here we also have our block, and we'll notice that both textures have that lighter color and that they are both missing. So placing us on the ground, you will notice that there is a little bit of a difference between every problem. So just placing them on the ground and then just checking it out, make sure, sometimes there is something wrong with the block texture or something like that. Or maybe the model is pointing to the wrong texture. And when that happens is, sometimes the item will look correct, but then it won't be until you place it, like in the beginning of the video. It said that, our item was wrong, but I still placed it, and it was perfectly fine because it was just missing that item model. But this is a lot to learn about textures, but it is now, I hope you learned a little bit about textures, and, well, we're still not quite done with them. I still want to work a little bit more on textures, and we're going to be making advanced textures. So in the next video, we're going to be making textures that are both transparent, and we're also going to be making animated textures. So textures that have multiple frames and then play like a little video, frame by frame action. So that is going to wrap up this video. I remember how in the last video I said that I was going to be talking about making custom templates, but what happened is I saw that there was a potential issue with how there was something with facing, and then I was like, oh yeah, I totally didn't teach appended properties, and that is my fault. And so that's not going to have to come until much later when we go through all the blocks. So I do apologize that I made that mistake. I do make mistakes a lot, and then I correct them as I go through the series. But hopefully that doesn't happen too much, and hopefully you guys are having a really good time. I hope you're learning a lot. If you're not, well, too bad. I hope I'm not wasting your time at that point. But that's going to be it for this video. So thank you guys so much for watching, and without further ado,